Good morning, everyone. It's great to be here. I don't have very many PowerPoints, trying to keep with the ethos of the event of not having too many. And because I'm going to be again on a panel this afternoon, I'll talk less about the economic benefits in all the detail. We can cover that in some of the questions and in the panel session later on this afternoon. So I'll just give an overview for now. I just want to start off with a bit of history on this, actually. If we think back to the 1960s, how the UK got its energy, so all energy, not just electricity, but transport and heating as well. And in 1965, before North Sea production began, it was 60% coal and nearly 40% oil. We didn't burn any natural gas. All the gas that we had in households came from coal. And fast forward a few years to 1973, and you have an oil price spike and a coal miners' strike and a 3-day week. So suddenly the UK looks very vulnerable indeed on energy. And that's really why the North Sea came along and was really an economic, an energy and also an environmental saviour. It met our energy trilemma of price, security of supply and environmental improvements, even before it was a trilemma, even before we weren't worrying so much about the environmental bit. I think on that environmental part, what the North Sea was able to do was, if you look at the green line, which is natural gas use, you see that the big energy story in the UK over the last 40 years is the progressive reduction in our share of coal and increase in our share of natural gas. And that could not have happened without the North Sea. And of course you get enormous CO2 benefits from that before we were even counting how much CO2 we put out, and huge air quality benefits too. And on the economic front, of course, the tax revenues that the North Sea was generating in the 1980s at peak were more than 5% of total government receipts. So the Thatcher government would have been in a real mess without the North Sea. North Sea oil met all our oil needs and more for about 25 years, and most of our growing need for natural gas for over 30 years. And still, even though production is declining, the North Sea still supports over 400,000 jobs. Aberdeen is still the second richest region in the UK after inner London per head. Still billions of pounds of tax revenue, still billions of pounds worth of exports. And of course, over those years, North Sea production supported wider British industry, not just in terms of a secure and competitively priced source of energy, but also by providing those vital raw materials, those vital feedstocks for our chemical industry. And I'd like to suggest that the opportunity that shale gas gives us is similar to the opportunity, perhaps not quite as large in scale, but similar in kind of scope to the opportunity that the North Sea gave us 30, 40 years ago. The gas in place numbers that the official bodies like the US EIA and shortly to be released British Geological Survey, and by the exploration companies themselves, they're going up and up all the time. So I don't think there's any doubt there's a huge amount of gas under the ground. We're going to need to do more exploration to find out what proportion of that is recoverable, but even if only a small percentage is recoverable, I think the gas in place numbers are now looking so large that you're going to see a pretty major impact if you can get a production phase actually going. I think it really shale gas really meets this modern trilemma actually, so I'll just start off about the economic benefits. First thing is jobs, of course, and often in parts of the country that really need them, not just in the industry, not just in the supply chain, but of course all the induced jobs as well that you're going to get, the benefits to local shops, pubs, restaurants, hotels, tourist attractions, all those kind of benefits you'll get from the industry, from its employees coming into an area. In Aberdeen, for example, around 60% of employment in Aberdeen City and Shire is supported one way or another by the oil and gas industry. So you think the potential for a region such as Lancashire pretty large. Tax revenues, again, falling receipts from the North Sea over the next years, and also from fuel duty as our car engines become more efficient, which is a great thing, but it means lower fuel duty revenues over time. Shale gas is likely to pay tax of between 30 and 62%, depending on how the allowances are determined. That's potentially quite a large amount of money that can start to fill that tax hole. And also, of course, we're currently importing around half of our gas, and that's set to go up to about 3/4 by 2030. What shale gas can do is really eat into that import dependency, so it can meet that energy security need as well. And I haven't talked about price. I'm not going to make any predictions on price. I think whatever happens to gas prices, even if shale has no impact at all, I think the economic benefits are large enough to make shale gas worthwhile doing. But it's not just about the economy, it's also about the environment. Several environmental benefits from shale gas. Firstly, it's lower carbon dioxide emissions than imported liquefied natural gas. So to the extent that it replaces imports, then you're going to have a carbon benefit there. Secondly, to the extent that it supports UK industry and UK manufacturing rather than manufacturing in other parts of the world that are more reliant on coal and less energy efficient. You're going to get a boost and a benefit there to global emissions. If you think about the UK's own production of carbon emissions, it's fallen over the last couple of decades, but the UK's consumption of carbon emissions has actually risen, and of course that's not surprising because we're importing more and more manufactured goods from countries such as China. So shale gas can help us to reduce our carbon consumption as well as our carbon production. And I think the other benefit is really about transport and being able to sort of erode into the amount of oil and diesel and petrol that's used in road transport. In the US, something like 1 in 5 local municipal buses now run on natural gas, and the chief executive of FedEx has said that, in his view, up to a third of long-distance trucking could be provided or fueled by compressed or liquefied natural gas over the coming years. So in the US, it's already happening. In the UK, we haven't really gone anywhere on natural gas in road transport. I think there's a really big potential to start doing that. A lot of talk is always made about carbon, and of course no one talks a lot about air quality, and I think that's really important. And happily, if you start to put shale gas or natural gas in road transport, not only are you cutting carbon, you're also massively improving air quality. That's probably city air. Diesel is probably the worst air quality issue we still have in the UK. I thought yesterday's session was really interesting because if you look at today's energy mix on this, then it's about 35% gas, 35% oil, that's 70%, 15% coal, so it's still about 85% hydrocarbon in the UK. Add on nearly 10% nuclear, and 95% of our energy is what Greenpeace would like us not to be using at all. So I'm all for thinking big, but you know, that's quite a tall order. So I'd actually suggest that if we were to think, perhaps a more realistic thing would be to say, well, let's try and get rid of the coal, which is mainly electricity, and let's try and reduce the oil, which is mainly road transport, and that's actually 50% of our energy. So it might be a more realistic goal to be thinking about how we can target those and how natural gas can actually help us on both those fronts. And I think it's not really an either-or, just from the point of view of energy, but also from the point of view of the economy. A wind turbine needs a lot of steel and a lot of concrete. And the question is, do you want to make that steel and do you want to make that concrete here in the UK, or do you want to make it overseas? And what shale gas can do, of course, is help you to support industry and manufacturing in this country, which can then help us to make the raw materials for renewable energy right here in this country rather than importing it. Now, a lot's been said about Lancashire, and we talk in our report a lot about Lancashire, but I think South Wales is also an interesting kind of area to look at in terms of the energy and the industry and the economy more generally. Obviously, a former coal mining area, currently now has a lot of unemployment, a lot of poverty, but fantastic energy resources. So on the hills above all the coal mining valleys, you've got lots of wind turbines already. You've got fantastic tidal resources right along that coast and a big tidal development plan for Swansea Bay. You've also got excellent, potentially excellent shale gas and coal bed methane resources. And of course you still have some steel manufacturing just about keeping going in Port Talbot. So how can you start thinking about shale gas playing its part in a wider economic development whereby you use the gas, for example, in South Wales to support the manufacturing in South Wales, which can help you to make the renewable energy that you also want to be putting on the system. And I think I just want to sort of, before we go on to questions, kind of leave with that thought really, that if we're going to get shale gas to work and overcome the barriers, and I'm happy to talk about them more later on, then we are going to need to think about how shale gas is part of that wider economic picture, how it can support renewables rather than acting as a sort of opposition to them, so that the clash between the two that's often talked about by those who are opposed to shale gas, actually, you know, it's not true in reality, and I think we need to really do a lot to try and get that message across. Thank you.
A lot's been said in the newspapers, etc., particularly on the power side, about the crunch that we're all going to face 2015, 2016, 2017. And a couple of years ago, it may have been overplayed, but Ofgem now are coming out of their concerns, etc. What does a capacity crunch in power mean economically to this country?
Well, I mean, I think it would be hugely damaging. I mean, the idea that you can't make stuff or you can't heat or power your home. I mean, you know, we had a 3-day week in the early 1970s when, you know, people were using candles to light their home and industry wasn't working, and that was hugely damaging. I don't think anyone's suggesting it's going to be that bad again, but you know, it is imperative that we do all we can to avoid that. I think the problem with the timing element of this is that this is sooner than we can get shale gas production going at scale, but there are going to be a lot of hard choices that the government's going to have to make.
Okay. I'd like to open up to the floor. Corin's a very interesting speaker, so any questions for Corin?
What are the hard choices?
Yeah, so if you look at, I'll just focus on electricity for now, because that's where the you know, the big kind of capacity crunch is. It's not so much on the heating side; it's more on the electricity generation side. So you've got the 2 European Union directives, the Large Combustion Plant Directive and the Industrial Emissions Directive, which are going to mandate the closure of a lot of our coal-fired power stations over the latter part of this decade. And of course, you've then got the nuclear stations which are coming to the end of their lives. Now, a lot of them will be extended into the 2020s, but then you've got an issue about replacing them. So how do you then meet that gap? So you've got a lot of coal coming off the system, a lot of nuclear coming off the system. Can you build enough new capacity quickly enough to offset that? And I think on the nuclear side, you can't. That, you know, you're going to get new nuclear if it does work. That will come on stream in the 2020s. And as for replacing the coal bit, obviously there's a lot of CCGT out there and some mothballed gas plants. So in the short run, I think, you know, there isn't really much alternative to using more natural gas and electricity to offset the decline in coal. It will take a bit longer for a lot of offshore wind to come on the system.
Okay, thank you, Corin. I think the next 10 minutes is a panel discussion. We have a geologist, 2 developers and an economist here. We've been up here now for an hour and 40 minutes. Oh, sorry, yes. I'd like to actually introduce somebody else to the group, which is Simon Talbot, who's Managing Director of Ground Gas Solutions, who's going to come and join us. He's worked over 20 years on ground investigations and contaminated land issues, much of this time focusing on ground gas contamination. We've been up here now for an hour and 40 minutes, so by my estimate, 9 wells in the US have been hydraulically fractured, and we've done 3.5 in 5 years. How can we make this go quicker? How can we get shale gas out of the ground quicker? And Simon, as you've joined us, why don't you start?
Thank you very much, Ken, and good morning, everyone. I think it's we're approaching a tipping point where we've got public perception changing, and the will for shale gas to be successful is now becoming more widespread, both in communities and in government, and it's continuing with that communication with the main decision makers on the benefits of shale gas that's going to win the argument.
Eric?
Yeah, I mean, our report identified a number of barriers to getting shale gas going. And I think the biggest one is the planning and permitting regime, and the potential for huge delays in the system. So I think what you're going to need to see to get shale going more quickly is, at the moment, you need to get sign-off from 4 different agencies, so 3 national and 1 the local authority as well. So you're going to need to see a clear division between which agencies are responsible for regulating and improving which aspects of the process. So I think you'd want to see the national agencies covering off the subsurface drilling and fracturing operations, and the local authority dealing with truck movements and so on. So you get that kind of distinction. You're going to need to see clear timelines, statutory timelines on how long an application can run until a decision has to be made. And then I think for production, you're going to need to make sure that your environmental permits and your planning approval covers all potential activities on a pad and not just each well or each fracturing job. Otherwise it'd be akin to needing approval for an individual wind turbine in a wind farm. So I think making sure that you get that bit right will be very important.
Ed?
I think over the past I don't know, 5 or 10 years, we have definitely moved from a situation of almost complete, we don't know if there is gas in some of these formations, to one where we're fairly sure now that some of these formations may contain significant amounts of gas. So I think that actually provides a lever, it provides an argument to the decision makers as to why we should explore things. And I think hopefully the more we get to know about these formations and the more we get to know about which areas may be prospective and may not be, hopefully that message will get through to the decision makers that the need is there, we have a demand, and the supply is potentially there. So to marry those up, I think the decisions are there to be made by the decision makers at the moment.
We talk a lot about myths and public perception, etc. Who should be taking that challenge on? Is it the government? Is it the industry? Is it academics? Who should be championing this?
I think it's actually a little bit of all those groups. Certainly the industry needs to have lots of public sessions to be very transparent and let everyone know exactly what we're doing and why we're doing different things. But I think the government needs to be able to also do that same thing and explain how they're regulating and how they're controlling the process. And then certainly I think one of the most trusted sources from all sides is the academic side. And with some of the various studies that are out and the various universities here in the UK that are doing a lot of work to be able to put some information out in the public. And I think what we hear a lot of the times, whether it's from the general public, whether it's Greenpeace, Friends of the Earth on one end, they don't quite get believed because they've got an agenda. And on the other end is the industry itself. And if we say one thing, it's like, well, they would have always said that because they're trying to do this. So they have difficulty believing some of the stuff that we have, and the kind of the academic ground in the middle seems to be like one of the most trusted sources, and it's also usually peer reviewed, and the proper studies. You have to be careful. There are certainly in the U.S. some academic studies that really are just propaganda for one side or the other, not necessarily pro-industry or anti-industry, but they definitely have an agenda. So you have to be careful on some of the studies, especially coming out of the States, that it is a proper peer-reviewed, a proper study.
Okay. Do we have enough skills in this country to do this? This is a big program. Do we have enough skills? And if we don't, how do we get them?
Certainly for the next several years in the exploration side, there's definitely enough skill. Most of the industry is already in place. As it grows, obviously you have to try and fill in, especially as you're trying to bring on all the local jobs, and as you develop a field, you don't want to, as an operator or a support company, you don't want to be bringing people in from other places because it's more expensive. You're way better off using as much local people and as much local talent as you can. Obviously that does take training, and I know several of the universities, certainly in the Northwest here, are looking at different programs and how can they support the industry.
Yeah, I think there are some I believe some skill shortages offshore as well. So, you know, making sure we have enough of the really highly trained people is going to be a challenge if you move to a production phase. I think there's no doubt about that. But I don't think that's a problem that's unique to shale gas. We seem to have a bit of a skills supply-demand mismatch in this country. So we'll be needing to look not just at what universities are up to, but also the types of education that schools are providing too.
I'd add to this, and going back to one of the comments that Dan Biles made yesterday, but there's three things which are going to make shale gas a success in the UK and a world-class leadership in shale gas, and that is having good regulation, development of best practices in the operators, and third, close environmental monitoring. And in respect to the skill sets for those, well, the regulators are getting their act together, I believe, and there's going to be new guidance coming out shortly. The problem there is there enough regulators in a trimmed down environment agency to actually do effective and timely permitting, for instance. In respect of the operators, clearly there will need to be more drillers, more drilling rigs, onshore drilling rigs, and I see that potentially as not only in the UK but for Europe, a dearth of drilling rigs is going to be potentially a brake on development of shale gas. And then the third sector, which is going to be important, is the independent environmental consultancies who can do the baseline monitorings, the EIAs, and the continuous monitoring like our company does. And I think there's plenty of those professionals available in the UK.
Okay. Bring it to the floor. Any questions? Gentleman in the white shirt.
Yes, Simon Green with Total. In terms of the baseline studies that are being done by BGS, is it a necessary factor to have those completed, do you think, before any substantial new regulations will be in place? And if so, what's the timescale for the completion of those studies?
I think for some of the areas the sampling is complete, and at the moment those areas are the ones where activities are happening already. We know some of the other areas that may be prospective, so some of those areas where the sampling is underway. So I don't think the baseline studies are going to hold up any further exploration, because as you know, there's going to be a new onshore permitting round at some stage. I don't know when, but you know, we'll make sure that the baseline studies are, you know, fit into that schedule as and when it's announced.
I think there was a question a bit further back.
Elizabeth Shepherd, Environment Partner Eversheds. Is it the panel's sense that the Office of Oil and Gas will help to coordinate and accelerate the permitting process and related issues, or is it likely to be an ongoing story of limited resource and ongoing frustration? What are your views, please?
Yeah, I mean, the Office of Unconventional Gas and Oil doesn't have the power to say to the Environment Agency, for example, you've got to do this permitting in this certain way, or they can't go to the Department for Communities and Local Government and say, you will write the planning guidance in this way. So I think that the real value of the office is in how it can coordinate the work of various government departments. And there are a lot of departments in there. I mean, you know, there's the Treasury, there's DEC, there's the Department for Communities and Local Government on the planning side, there's DEFRA on the Environment Agencies. You've got 4 national government departments, and then of course you've got the local authorities that make the planning decisions. So I think the best the office can do is coordinate the work of those different departments and make sure that it is going in the right direction. But they don't have the power to say to departments, you've got to do things this certain way. So I think it's really good that we've got the office, but I think at the same time, you know, we can't expect it to do all the work for us on its own.
Thank you.
Anybody else? Okay, another question? Gentleman right at the back there.
Hi there, good morning. My name is Ali Watson. I work for Rita Oilfield. In a previous life, I used to be a house builder, so I was quite used to dealing with the planning authorities and what that brought about. A question, what is it they do in the US in regards to planning that makes that process slick, whereas over here it's greasy and doesn't move very quick?
I think one of the key differences is it's quite well resourced. They don't hesitate, and Canada's the same actually, to resource up their various regulatory departments to make sure that they're meeting the demand of industry. I think the other thing with the US is it's a very mature industry, and so a lot of the processes are boilerplate, so it becomes more of a cooking cutting process than perhaps regulatory officers in various European jurisdictions who are seeing things for the first time, and so you have that massive learning process to get comfortable with what's going on. So I think it's a combination of a more mature onshore industry and simple resources.
Okay. Any more questions? A gentleman here.
Hi, my name is Arben Patha from RPS Energy. I'm a geoscientist, so a quick technical question for Ed there on this wonderful surprise of shale oil. And I heard you saying that there'll be producible shale oil. I'm just wanting to get some clarity on that, because you mentioned, for instance, Boland might be oil mature and we might be able to recover shale oil. In your report, will you provide guidance on what the recovery factors might be? And are there any analogous US plays where there are black shales producing? My current knowledge says the major ones like the Bakken and the Eagleford are non-black shales.
The report with DEC, it purely looks at gas in place resource estimate, so it doesn't address recovery factors at all. And as for whether or not we can produce oil or not, I think that really is a question to be addressed once the exploration has been done and the flow tests have been carried out. So I can't really shed much light on that at the moment, I'm afraid.
Thanks.
Okay, and one last question.
I guess a key element of making shale gas work or shale oil work in the UK would be the cost element. We know from the data we have that the oils are more expensive than the US. Now I'm trying to understand what aspects of that can be dealt with, because if the break-even cost of producing shale gas is over the prices we have now, which I understand is around $10 an MMBTU. So if it costs us significantly higher than that, really we live in a market. So the question is, who's going to buy that gas? And also, when it comes to tax revenue, the government, because of the upfront costs being so much, the government starts receiving tax way out in the future. So I guess a key challenge is to bring down the cost. So I would like to understand what elements of that cost can be brought down. The biggest part of it, I guess, is the well cost. How much of it can be realistically brought down to levels of what we have in the US as the closest analog?
Yeah, I think a lot of it, I don't know if we'll ever make it all the way down to the U.S. prices, because the U.S. prices continually to drop. And I think we'd have some of the same drivers here that reduce the prices in North America. And one of the reasons for higher prices, certainly from, say, the drilling and the well services, hydraulic fracturing, that aspect of the well is in Europe and in the UK in particular, the utilization of the equipment is not very high. Where in North America and the U.S., a drilling rig is basically drilling continuously. It goes from one well to the next well to the next well to the next well to the next well. The frac crew follows along behind. Whereas, currently in the market here, a drill rig might only drill, 1 or 2 wells a year. Excuse me. And the same with hydraulic fracturing services. So these companies that are supporting, these multi-million-dollar assets don't get to use them very much. They don't generate very much revenue. Whereas once you go into, more development drilling, where you can say, yeah, I want to contract your rig, and I want it to drill continuously, throughout a field in roughly the same area, for a year or 2 years or 3 years or whatever, then you can get a lot better market rate, a lot better rates on that. And the same thing with all the other services for that side. It's just a supply and demand type thing. If you can basically guarantee somebody work continuously for X number of wells or whatever, you get a lot better price than you say, I need you one time, and my planning's going to put it sometime in the next this 6-month period, and can you give me a price for that? It's just far higher than once you're in a steady environment and that.
Good. Thank you, gentlemen, for your time today. It's been very enlightening and very enjoyable. And on behalf of everyone, thank you very much.